Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
Congress directed the Trump administration to rescind shutdown-era layoffs as part of the spending deal that ended the government shutdown. Some employees targeted by layoffs said they haven't been brought back, and that the language in the continuing resolution supports their push for reinstatement. But agencies say some of their reductions in force will remain in effect. Federal News Network's Jory Heckman is here with the details. Jory, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Terry.
You're reporting specifically on the Small Business Administration. What have they been telling employees?
Well, it's been a strange time for these SBA employees. About 77 of them, before the shutdown started in late September, they received reduction in force notices telling them that they would be separated fairly soon, and that was the way that they were expecting things to play out. And of course, the shutdown ending deal had this provision in there that directed agencies to rescind some layoffs. And so there was some back and forth specifically at SBA. They sent a notice last week to these employees and said that in light of that deal, they would be brought back to their jobs, that they would rescind those RIF notices, and they were told to come back to work on Wednesday. And that they received a notice just a day later telling them the complete opposite. They said, disregard that previous notice. Your RIF notices will remain in place. You will continue to be separated from the agency. And I did reach out to SBA for clarification, and a spokesperson there did say that this is the most current up-to-date thing, is that those RIF notices will proceed, and that this impacts 77 positions altogether.
For the impacted employees, what are they saying about this? Why are they arguing that they should, in fact, be returned?
Well, there's a little bit of ambiguity to some of the language that lawmakers put in this continuing resolution to end the government shutdown. It really boils down to this language here that says any reduction in force proposed, noticed, initiated, executed, implemented, or otherwise taken by an executive agency between October 1st and the date of enactment shall have no force or effect. And so what these SBA employees say is that they may have gotten the RIF notice before the shutdown, but they would have been separated from the agency officially during the shutdown. And they say that falls well within the language that lawmakers put in here. And so parsing the legalese, they think that this impacts them as well. SBA, however, says something different. They say that because those RIF notices went out before the shutdown, that they are not covered under this provision.
Who's going to be the adjudicating authority here?
Well, that's a tough question here because, OPM has put out its own guidance. They have said something that's more in line with what SBA has said. And so it's really a matter of how far, I suppose, these employees want to take it. If they want to escalate this up to some sort of lawsuit, that may be something that becomes a matter for the courts. But right now, it seems like the agency's word on this is the final word overall.
Just to be clear and say it again, the reason SBA thinks they're in the right by continuing to execute the RIFs is because they provided notice before the shutdown began.
That's correct.
Even though it didn't take effect until during the shutdown.
That's their reading of it, is that the RIF notices went out before the shutdown, so they don't have to worry about bringing these people back.
There were many other agencies that were in the midst of or preparing for reductions in force when the shutdown hit. Are you hearing these same kinds of challenges in other places?
Well, by and large, the more than half dozen agencies that were sending RIF notices during the shutdown, they have rescinded those reduction in force notices. They've complied with the language in the continuing resolution. We've seen that play out at the IRS, for example, and a couple of other agencies. Education is another one. But there is some confusion elsewhere within the federal government, or at least some pushback from recently RIFed employees. And that happened at the General Services Administration. About 35 employees there. They have retained legal representation through the Gilbert Employment Law Group. They sent a letter to GSA saying that they believe that these employees should be reinstated for the same reasons that SBA employees believe that they should be reinstated. And they say in this letter that GSA doesn't expect to bring them back. This has been brought to the agency's attention, and they also will have no intention of bringing these employees back. This is a very similar situation. These employees received RIF notices in late September, would have been officially separated from the agency during the shutdown, and look to this somewhat vague language in the continuing resolution and say, well, this sounds a lot like me. This sounds like my scenario, and I should have my job back. So yet again, another situation where the agency believes one thing and the employees believe another.
Have the courts had anything to say about these cases or similar ones from earlier in the year?
So not recently, but I think it's worth looking back to something that we saw play out during the shutdown. Of course, back then there was a preliminary injunction ordered by a federal judge blocking the shutdown reductions in force, ultimately deciding that that was an activity that shouldn't be exempt from a government shutdown when a lot of things are put on hold. And the judge in this case, Judge Susan Ilston in San Francisco, when she handed down that preliminary injunction, she did make an interesting aside that perhaps gives ammunition to the agency's argument in this case. She said that she had heard from a number of SBA employees who received RIF notices, and because their RIF notices went out before the shutdown, she said that they would not be covered by her preliminary injunction. So an interesting thing in hindsight to look back on and see that this is something that she didn't think that SBA employees specifically were going to be covered by her preliminary injunction, and maybe leads credence to the idea that they wouldn't be covered by this language in the continuing resolution. But we haven't heard any additional clarity beyond the current state of play.
Interesting arguments on both sides then. How do you think this gets resolved?
Well, again, I think it comes down to how far agencies' employees want to push this, whether they want to escalate this up to lawsuits or whether they want to just, if they haven't gotten their jobs back at this point, whether it's worth pushing any further. So I think that's the ultimate question here. There have been a number of situations where employees have been trying to push back here. And another one as well is the American Foreign Service Association. They have also cited layoffs that happened back this summer for Foreign Service officers and State Department employees. They have a very similar argument that these employees were going to be separated this fall when the shutdown happened, and that they should also have those RIFs rescinded. So just because there's multiple examples of this happening doesn't mean that they will prevail in those arguments, but there are an awful lot of those cases happening right now.
That's Federal News Network's Jory Heckman. Jory, thanks for keeping us up to date.
Thanks, Terry.
You can find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com.